My name is Jerm. This is Jerm Warfare, the battle of ideas. I have been seeing a lot of interesting articles and hearing interesting podcasts lately about multipolarity versus unipolarity. I want to discuss this a little bit because I am somebody who does support multipolarity, but apparently that makes me a globalist. And I want to just chat to you guys about why this is a terrible dichotomy to make, because I live in a third world country, and to me, it's very obvious that there are benefits to global competition. So right off the bat, am I wrong in saying that it's possible to separate multipolarity from globalism?
Yes and no would be my initial reaction to that. A lot of years ago, Jerm, we at the UK column encouraged a group. We got together with a group of people to look at the way that the law in Britain was being subverted or twisted to suit certain agendas. Now, Britain, as you'll probably know, is a common law country. The Constitution is not written in a single document. It's spread across multiple documents, multiple conventions, and so on. And we felt that it was important that people had some understanding of the Constitution in the UK and what that means for our governance and so on. And so we got together a bunch of people and we organized that they would set up a thing called the British Constitution Group. Now, I'm not going to get into the argument of whether it's the British Constitution or the English Constitution. For me, coming from Northern Ireland, of course, it should be British because should be all part of one country. But these days, people are being taken down rabbit holes and so on that are quite divisive. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. The point is, one of the techniques that has been used over the years to subvert British common law is that you take a term, writ of mandamus, for example, and you create a layer on top of that has the same name. And so that when people get the form from the courts that says writ of mandamus on it, they think that they may think, if they have any historical knowledge, they may think that it means one thing, which is the original common law writ, when in fact it has some significant changes and limitations and differences to the original intention, right? I'm not going to go into the details of that at this moment, but the same thing happens with international relations. And we take the term New World Order, for example. In international relations, that is a very generic sort of non-controversial term, because from time to time historical events take over and the world order shifts and you end up with a new world order. This is a term that's been used in international relations for decades. But of course, in recent years, this term has become something which means something quite different from the traditional international relations term. And that means that whenever you see somebody using that phrase in a speech or whatever, people immediately start jumping up and down and saying, oh, well, they mean this. Well, actually, you have no way of knowing that they mean that, and you need to do more research. And this is part of the problem that we have with the use of these terms like multipolarity. I mean, what does multipolarity mean? From an international point of view, it's something which describes the idea that it's anti-colonialist in a sense. It describes the idea that you actually pay attention to the needs of smaller countries, and that you're not just trying to ramrod them into a corner and steal their assets. But then there's the globalist meaning of a multipolarity, because this is an effort by the West to take over, what they would perceive as being a threatening to their world order. It is a threatening idea, because the last thing you want is a bunch of jigaboos and jungle bunnies coming along and actually having the assets that they own for themselves. It's absolutely racist at heart, but the the point is they use the same term intentionally in order to bring about confusion or division or whatever, and it helps them with their narratives. So we got to be very, very careful about that. So I'm absolutely with you. I am absolutely in favor of multipolarity in a certain sense, but maybe not in the sense that certain people are using the term. And
okay, so
the problem is that we got to be careful about what sense we mean it in.
It's the language then. The language has been hijacked.
Correct. 100%.
I often wonder if it's too binary when they go, oh, well, multipolarity is just globalism. Because they, as you just pointed out, there are practical realities. Now, I would argue that it's not about who holds the power, but about how the power is structured.
No, hold on a second. Before we move past that point, because you've just raised something which is equally important. The people that are up in arms about the use of the term are again looking at it from a very Western, first world centered perspective. And so they're looking at the documents that are being published by the people that are wanting to take over the term. And they're never looking at it from the point of view of the people in South Africa or in India or in any of the smaller countries that are have been on the receiving end of colonialism over the centuries. They're never looking at it from those perspectives. They've never been there. They don't know what those countries are like. They don't know the issues that those countries are facing. And so they are absolutely coming at this whole argument from a Western, first world, privileged point of view. And that colors their interpretation of what people in the developing world are saying. And I think that is also to be taken into consideration.
Well, definitely, because when we wanted to host Putin, we immediately got threats from the US saying that if he lands on South African soil, we'll impose sanctions. And I forget now who, was it, what's his name, Blinken? No? Who was it now? I forget now. It was a few years ago who was one of their diplomats. Anyway, he said he flew here and tried to negotiate with the South African government saying, do not allow Putin. Now, that is unipolarity right there. We can't oppose that because the US has just got too much power still.
Charles?
Yes. No, I think you're quite right. I think defining terms is where this stuff goes wrong, because just saying multipolarity and expecting everyone to fall in with your definition immediately is that's quite a leap. And also in terms of leaps, I think the way in which this debate or discussion or discourse or conjecture gets coloured is by the assumption of bad faith. And we talked about this to a certain extent relatively recently when we were discussing BRICS and what the potential outcomes could be over the next few decades. And it entirely depends whether you're going to take I suppose you could broadly say an optimistic or a pessimistic view. If you take the view that having one dominant power in the world is a bad thing and has bad outcomes, and that balance could be redressed and in effect the world could be made a better place if that was countered by other poles, other powers who appeared to be acting in good faith, then the outcome there is good. But if you assume bad faith in that anyone who's going to compete for a piece of the pie with that one power in order to enter into a state of multipolarity, but the only reason that they want to do so is in order to prosecute the same agenda, possibly even via the same control mechanism, or sort of, if you believe there's a central control source, then clearly that is a bad outcome. So it entirely depends. But I think where I do fall out with this is that it's just rampant speculation. Nobody I've seen commentating can go beyond saying this looks like that. None of these people have sat inside these rooms where these sorts of things might be discussed in order to know for sure that what they're saying is actually what is happening. And I think that is a further problem. But on a very basic level, if you look at any grouping, it doesn't matter whether it's on a worldwide stage, sometimes it will be practical to have, let's say, one voice, one mechanism. Sometimes that will not be practical because it will lead to an abuse of that power, control, whatever you want to call it. And I must say, I don't think that enough consideration is given to the absolutely enormous number of variables. And again, we did talk about this before. The thing is, with all of this, we are where we are. I know that might sound a bit trite, but that is how we, on a practical level, that's how you've got to approach everything. Because otherwise, what are you doing? You're just pontificating. And that is, I would say, to a certain extent, pointless if you're trying to suggest that your conclusions are in some way meaningful. Because if you don't address the situation as it is, then how are you ever going to get to the sort of where it could be, where it could go? And I don't think that's really done very much. Yeah, go on.
Sorry, Charles. A good example of unipolarity is sanctions. Look at who is imposing the sanctions, for example.
Yeah, I mean, indeed, and I think the view I would go along with is that nobody wins, and certainly those imposing sanctions just end up looking like idiots. I mean, how is there a more effective way of inviting other people, individuals, or nations to cooperate and coalesce against that? I mean, you're effectively creating exactly the opposite condition from the one that you say that you're setting out to deal with in imposing this sanction. I mean, it's the most daft thing that I can really think of. In terms of language hijacking, sorry, the one that springs to mind, just because I know that because this is so macro, I think it can appear to be a bit intangible because it's so big, so many elements. The obvious example to me in terms of hijacking language is regenerative farming. And I'm not trying to switch the conversation onto something else, but regenerative farming is such a good example. When one person says that, they think they know what they mean by it. That could have not exactly an opposite meaning, but a very, very different meaning from somebody else. And if you're listening to this and wondering, where is he going with this? What do you mean? Regenerative farming is founded in its genuine, sincere sense, is founded on 5 principles, which involve using the land only, really, in order to better the entire food system. So you're improving the quality of the soil through using animals and subsequently developing and enhancing human health and all the rest of it. So it's an upward spiral. And it doesn't, critically, the whole point of it is it does not involve the either chemical or sort of industrial inputs via machinery and all the rest of it. Basically, it's low cost. Now, that has been subverted and jumped upon by the corporate sort of big agriculture, still labelled as regenerative. And they say that it's going to improve this and that, but actually when you look at it, it's not. The model is totally different, and it's just had something else superimposed that is going to enable prolonging exactly the same conditions, where basically people are slaves either to government subsidy or to some sort of corporate debt. I mean, so that is a really good example of how language gets hijacked, and it just muddies the waters. It means that the entire conversation is very, very difficult to have unless you really, really strictly define terms at the start. So I think that's going back to your original question. When people, multipolarity, you cannot just assume that everyone knows what you're talking about when you say that. And I think that is a problem. And then you do just get into a sort of an endless thing, chasing your tail.
Just to feed into what you're saying, a great example of language hijacking is my recent spate of chemtrail discussions with Jim Lee and James
Perfect
Roguski.
example.
People don't know what a chemtrail means. We can't have a conversation until we actually agree on a definition of a word, and not just all words, because otherwise we'll never have conversation if we defining everything. But certain words are deliberately used to hijack and derail conversations.
Yeah. That is. I hope I haven't wasted everyone's time. That is a much better example than the one I just gave, because it does. It's a trigger, and that's the other thing that we mustn't forget. The way that the debate around multipolarity is being used, it is, and I'm sorry to use this word, but it has absolutely been weaponized. If you think this, you're an idiot, or you're this, that, and the other, which is. I don't think that's ever a constructive way of framing a debate. The chemtrails thing, it is exactly the same. Oh, just look up, as though, yep, there you go, 10-0, that's it, I've won. And this is just, it's daft. How, let's just be a little bit more, human about it. Treat each other with respect, go through this in slow time, and actually understand what you mean. And this is the other thing. I mean, seriously, are the sort of, oh my goodness, you're a multipolarist, you fool, you must be thinking this, that, and the other, you want digital ID, for example. Yeah. I mean, that's the sort of, is that really where this goes? It's so basic, it's so lazy. Why not go through it step by step and find out, like with all these things, that actually the ground between your positions is much, much smaller than you think, but people don't want to do that, because everybody now wants to this is absolutely manipulation, applied behavioral psychology. People want to be, they pigeonhole themselves. They want to be either known as, oh, I'm a this, that, and the other, or I'm not. No, I'm definitely not a multipolarity supporter. It's just, I'm afraid all these people saying this, I think, sort of blanket judgment, that they have all been, they're the subject of a psychological operation. You've got to be seen to be either really dismissive of something or really supportive of it, and you cannot tolerate the opinion of anybody else that appears to conflict with you. That's a really
false dichotomy.
Well, it is, and it's a really sorry state of affairs, especially when actually what we're talking about are people who, on the face of it, are really all talking about the same sorts of things. What is it about this idea of global control that's actually bad? The things that manifest from it. There is a universal opposition to. I mean, we can easily identify. We can point to all the various things. So actually, we are all in agreement. But because we're lazy in defining terms, and we're lazy insofar as not really thinking about whether we care about sort of supposedly sort of making friends or enemies, the whole thing becomes, just sort of messy. And ultimately, exactly like on the news program this week on Wednesday, or maybe it was in Extra, we talked about how exactly the same thing has happened with protest, whilst the sort of high level debate has been about the threat to the right, let's say the right to protest, to associate, freedom of expression, all that. Actually, what's been going on underneath that, which people have not been nearly so cognizant of, is the fact that every single time people turn up to apparently protest something, there's always a counter protest there. The whole thing gets politicized, and the result of that is just infighting, and we don't get anywhere. And I would say that the multipolarity thing is doing exactly that. So in effect, it is yet another psychological operation, by which I'm not saying, someone there in the CIA twiddling his thumbs, there's my multipolarity plan. But it becomes a psychological operation because people fall into it, and it becomes a trap of their own making. And I think this is it's yet another example of it. And there'll be something else around the corner as well. Someone else will just pipe up and say, "Oh, I'll tell you what, look, I'm cleverer than all you lot. I've thought of this thing, you haven't thought of that, and I'm right, you're wrong."
Gaddafi is another example. Right. He wanted to break Western dominance across the African continent, as well as Zionism. And what happened?
Yeah. But another, we as usual forget our own history, European history. We have had some pretty 30 years war here, 100 years war there, and so on. We've had some pretty heavy conflict in Europe in the last couple of thousand years, or at least 1,000 years anyway. And at the end of one of those, we created a treaty. I've mentioned it many times before. I'm going to keep mentioning it because at the end of the day, if we're looking at principles about how we manage international relations and so on, and it's absolutely part of the unipolarity, multipolarity conversation. The entire principle of the nation state was founded on the Treaty of Westphalia, and people have got to read it. They've got to read the first clause of it. The whole principle that you organize yourself around a nation, and that you manage your international affairs by considering the impacts of your behavior on your neighbors and putting your neighbors' needs first. Seems like a absolutely reasonable way to run international relations. And that is not only forgotten. I mean, Tony Blair specifically, when he left politics, specifically said that the Peace of Westphalia, the Westphalian principle, was outdated and that we just need to forget it. Well, if Blair is saying we need to forget something, we should be taking notice. If he specifically calls that historical event out as being something that we need to forget, then I think, in fact, that's something we need to be looking at very, very closely and considering whether there's a principle there that is something that we want to embrace rather than throwing in the bin.
A popular phrase is regime change. Okay, so let's consider that for a second. Which countries have received regime change? Well, we can think of perhaps Iraq, Syria, the attempt on Iran, Libya. Have any of those countries attempted regime change? In other words, if we turn it around, which countries are attempting to change the regime in, let's say, unipolar or first world countries? I don't think any.
No, I mean, what you mean?
Venezuela, there's another one.
Yes, but do you mean why aren't the people of Bolivia desperate to change the regime in Russia? Is that what you mean?
Well, what I'm saying is, look at who's got the power.
Yes, no, absolutely. No, I just want to make sure I understood what you meant. No, well, this is it, and this absolutely strikes back to what Mike was saying about this sort of terrific ignorance and arrogance in considering things only through the lens of a Westerner, sort of spoilt Westerner, and exactly that. And I've made this point many times, having spent time on operations in Afghanistan, let's say, it before, during, and afterwards, has always struck me as just completely extraordinary. I mean, why is it that people never considered it the other way around? Why did people never think? Why did the people of Barnsley in England never think, gosh, I wonder what it would be like having a brigade of Afghans coming through the town telling me that I can or can't do this, that, and the other? So yes, I think that is absolutely a point worth making. Sorry, the other thing, just to go back to the treaty and in considering other nations and whatnot, I think I'm sorry to shatter the illusion. Today we're recording, in fact, on the 23rd, which of course is St. George's Day, and this can't go unmentioned because in how far we've come off the rails, let's say, because here we are where the level in the United Kingdom, even amongst the four nations, there is terrific vitriol and vindictiveness about all sorts of things. But the idea that, I'm English or I'm whatever, I mean, it's particularly, I would say, English. And yet here we are on St. George's Day. And I mean, how absolutely laughable, because has anyone really bothered sort of looking into it when they're flying their St. George's Cross, and especially those that have been weaponized by, I would say, the Israel lobby in order to consider that their foe is the Muslim down the road, or the Muslim that's not even down the road yet, but might be considering coming to this country. Because, of course, St. George was not British or English or from anywhere near the British Isles. It's slightly hard to pin down exactly where he may have been from, but possibly Turkish, possibly Palestinian, certainly not Christian, certainly not English. And the irony there is absolutely biting. But of course, going a little bit further than that, and then this is why we have to consider the timeline, especially going back to multipolarity, because where are these poles even existing at a particular point in time? England, as we recognise it now, as you look at it on the map, was not that far back a series of different kingdoms, and there weren't any. There was a point before that there weren't any Saxons, there weren't any Angles. So really, what is it that people want to be, and why are we still so selective about this particular point in time? That's the bit that we have to stick to. That's it. It's that. No, it's not that bit before. It's not that bit afterwards. It's that bit. I think there is a terrific rigidity inserted into people's thoughts on all of this. And look at you, Jerm. South Africa. Absolutely incredible mixture of people. So what do? Do you stand there beating your chest saying, "Oh, I despise all these other people. I don't want them to be here," or do you consider what Mike's been saying and you accept it and you make the best of it? And again, this goes back to whether or not you're going to assume good or bad faith. Are you always going to assume that because somebody is either different or has a different point of view, that they're up to no good and they intend you harm? If that's where you start, then the chances of securing a good outcome for future relations are seriously compromised.
The rules-based order, there's another one. Who follows that?
Well, I know who doesn't.
The rules-based order is an invention of the unipolar world, and of course the unipolar powers do not. They're the first people that break the rules. It's the rules-based order is there for everybody else to follow. It's not for the United States or Britain or the EU.
Yeah, indeed. Actually, sorry, I'll tell you what, just going back, I just thought of a slightly better parallel with the assumption of good or bad faith. The analogy I made with regenerative farming. So for me to say that I would hope for a future in which regenerative farming succeeds, what I mean by that is one that is devoid of chemical industrial inputs, one that does improve the soil, one that does improve human health, trading relations, and all the positives that I absolutely believe can be achieved and that are in certain environments achieved. I would look at multipolarity in the same way and say that I would like, if a situation of multipolarity is attained or achieved, I would like it to be a situation in which no one party is able to act with a sort of undue, unwarranted control in order to subvert the wishes of others, for people effectively to just be decent toward one another, not just at the individual level, but at the national level. If people did assume good faith and did trade on that basis, and if that sounds like pie in the sky, then I think people are too cynical. I don't see why that can't become the case. And I think there have been instances over the course of history where those sorts of relations absolutely have been a part of the way in which societies operated. I think in a lot of cases the debate now is it just always harks back to colonialism and the way in which from at least that point, and I'm not suggesting this hasn't happened before, because obviously empires have existed for forever in a way, so there have always been instances of this, but I don't think we can write off absolutely every relationship between a nation or a state or any grouping with another as always being sort of wrong or one-sided.
Yeah, the key here is nuance, right? Yeah. When you get caught up in 1-0 thinking, you end up dismissing the world as it is right now. You end up ignoring reality. Look at what's going on in Iran, right? Now, I think in many ways, on a macro level, this is an attempt to maintain a unipolar order. This is a way to preserve Western hegemony.
I think that's absolutely right. And I mean, what is the effect of, many of the people that are effectively running campaigns about multipolarity do so in a way which leads people to believe that there's nothing can be done about it. Actually, so it becomes they trade themselves on particular narratives, but for them it's absolutely everything's a done deal, and at the end of the day, whatever they say is the final outcome is what is going to happen. But of course, by presenting it in the way that they do, and presenting it as something which cannot be fought because it's too big and too centrally controlled and nobody has any agency and so on, then inevitably that is the outcome that is going to, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because nobody ever develops the determination or the desire even to get involved in the discussions. You might call it a fight if you want to, but it doesn't have to be a fight. Actually, it's about influencing outcomes, and influencing outcomes is something that happens when people sort of join together and present a different view of where the destination might be, and before you know it, the world is heading in that direction, if that's really what you're determined to do. But the way that this is presented as being a fait accompli and something which is impossible to influence, it pulls everybody's teeth, and therefore that inevitably is going to be the outcome.
It's the equivalent to doom scrolling.
Yeah. And these people are trading off that and building careers off that. And unfortunately, many people are helping are contributing to those types of voices. And the outcome is set under those circumstances. It doesn't have to be.
The thing for me, Mike, is that there's theory and there's reality. And a lot of this is just a chattering classes. It's just academic. And while there is a lot of truth, I think, in the criticisms of multipolarity, there is also equally a dismissal of day-to-day reality. Many people in my country and across the continent, and let's ignore Africa. I'm sure Latin America and other countries that don't have any power yet on a global level would love to see more competition. They would love to see the choices that come with not having, a monopolistic system. And I've noticed that most critics of multipolarity come from those exact environments where they have everything already built up. And it almost appears to me as if it's a kind of like it's a cat in the corner that's lashing out now. It sees something that's happening and it's trying to take other people down with them.
I think there's absolutely that going on. But of course, one of the other downsides to this entire conversation and the amount of time that's spent discussing multipolarity is in this. I'm not talking about in this particular conversation, but more generally, the focus remains on a development of the system as it sort of is at the moment. And I would very much like to see a much more local conversation happening at the same time. And in many ways, the whole unipolarity versus multipolarity conversation drowns out any conversations that are going on about what countries can do for themselves, within themselves, perhaps with their direct neighbors, but you know, the bigger conversation about international affairs is, you know, should we be shipping goods and services around the world in the way that we are at all? Never mind the unipolarity, multipolarity conversation. You know, we're limiting the conversation and the fight about one particular topic. I'm not talking about this specific conversation, but I'm talking about the bigger discussion. All that focus is on that one issue, and we should be perhaps considering, you know, some of the other topics that we have discussed on this program, and many others do discuss, but they don't get the same traction or focus. Maybe that. Yeah,
but there's a kind of intellectual laziness going on. Then, Mike, is what you're saying, because you have very real things going on, and it's fine to zoom out, but when you constantly zoom out, you then dismiss the details entirely, and it becomes difficult then to have any kind of meaningful discourse if everything is dismissed the whole time.
Yes.
Look, I think that it is inevitable that unipolarity is starting to crumble. It is inevitable. You can see it. It's happening. And I would like to see...
Yeah, but hold on a second. But why is that? I mean, you know, because earlier on, I can't remember what we were talking about, but it occurred to me, I think, oh yes, we were talking about sanctions. Sanctions is one expression of what happens when a unipolar world starts behaving badly, because you know, as we've discussed this, but let's say because it perceives a threat from up and coming competitors and it wants to keep those competitors suppressed. But it's the monopoly in the system that is a real problem, and also a driver of multipolarity, because the Western world, the unipolar world is behaving like such bullies. And the example that I'm thinking of here is the international payments clearing system, SWIFT, whatever you want to call it. You know, the fact that somebody can come along and say, this is ours, you have no say in how it is run, and actually we don't like you anymore, so we're going to deplatform you. Well, you know, at an absolutely micro level, those of us who've been speaking out and have found ourselves deplatformed from YouTube or from Facebook or whatever, we haven't found that a terribly pleasant experience. Just scale that up then to the international level. When you're trying to do some kind of international trade and you find that you're not able to pay your counterparty because the bully boy in the corner there has said, bog off, you're not getting to use the international payment system.
Russia has that.
Absolutely existential for countries. And so the irony in this is that the bully boy switches off the ability to use their platform. And so the other countries develop their own platform. They start trading in other currencies. The United States has absolutely shot itself in the foot by behaving this way. And this of course then leads to a downward spiral, because once other countries start developing their own parallel systems, and you know, it's not a coincidence that when Michael Gove redefined the definition of extremism in the UK, again, local example, that he included the idea of developing parallel systems as an example of extremism, right? Because that is a threat to the monopoly on violence and the monopoly on control that the British state has over the British people. Don't set up a parallel system, because that is a threat to us. This is happening at an international scale as well. But once people do develop parallel systems, the monopoly gets broken, and you know, you've ended up with losing the power and influence that you had as a unipolar power, in the first place. So, it is counterproductive on a long-term basis for the US, the UK, the EU to say, yeah, Russia, you're not allowed to use the international payments platform anymore because we don't like you. So they're going to do their own thing. And that should happen at a local level as well, by the way. And we should be seeing much, much more of that kind of thing. But we're not yet. So, that's it doesn't work at the end. And the danger then, of course, is that the bully becomes frustrated and starts striking out, and that's what we're starting to see with Iran, and we'll see it with other kind of Venezuela, and we'll see it with other countries as well.
Oh, well, I mean, I jumped in there earlier and I said Russia. I mean, for example, I can't receive or make payments between here and Russia because of the SWIFT model that is being sanctioned in Russia. So you have to find now another way around, and that's, in some way that's a good thing because it creates the parallel, it creates the competitive aspect. But SWIFT has a monopoly, and that's the point that you were making. There needs to be a collection of choices, which there isn't.
Charles?
I'm guessing the answer is yes.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I think it comes back to just the way in which you should treat others, and I mean that on a national or state level as well. I know this is a very difficult one to make any absolutes about, because when you look at the behaviour, or at least the behaviour in the way in which we might consider it of certain nations, then it's sort of hard to suggest that they should be dealt with respect. But the problem is, if you don't start at that point, then it's not going to work. This just goes back to the good faith thing. But yes, I mean, I think in principle, just having one way to do something, yeah, I mean that's not necessarily such a good idea. But I have to be careful what I say, because I'm also the same person that can never understand why there was ever more than one type of blinking charger for a mobile telephone, or more than one way to do something on a thing. I mean, it's perhaps trivial, but
now look, hold on, that's a pretty dangerous road to be heading down, Charles, because while I absolutely do agree with you, who makes the decisions about which is the one way, and I think part of the problem there is also a unipolar thing, because the whole patent system, for example, sort of makes it that basically, okay, I've designed the one way, and therefore you've got to pay me money.
Yeah,
and even if it is only 1 cent per USB connection, that ends up being a lot of money very, very quickly. So yeah, it's absolutely about how we, because I also don't have a problem in principle with there only being one payment system. It seems like duplication of effort is not such a great idea, but yes. Who's in charge of it? What's and that's the main problem. If it's in the hands of one vested interest, then exactly. And then we're into the whole discussion about global infrastructure again. And so if there's only one payment system, then that's a global payment system. Is that really a wise thing to do? So there is absolutely a discussion to be had around that, and you could be said that again, competition brings innovation, and so having multiple options for payment systems might be a good thing. I don't know the answer to this. That's something that absolutely needs to be hashed out. But so I'm not going to propose an answer to that at all.
And the other thing also is, I don't think all conflicts of interest can be faked indefinitely. Let's just think about what's going on now with the US and China and Taiwan and semiconductor supply chains. This is a real thing. This is a real issue, and it can't they're certainly not all sitting around a table having cocktails together and going, well, we're going to fool the world.
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, Jerm. I think.
Well, okay. So let me help a little bit in my thinking. You've got the US sending more and more naval presence to Taiwan. Now, why would it be doing that?
Well, yeah, right. I don't want to oversimplify anything. Where do we go with that? I don't think there's any simple answer to that question of why would they be doing that, because there are multiple motivations for it. I think in the modern context, the main motivation for it is because regime change in China is something that the unipolar world is desirous of, and Taiwan is the opportunity to get a wedge in and create a crisis which can then be used at a later date. And I don't know how much later date that is going to be. That's the desire of certain elements within the establishment of the West. The reality, of course, is quite different. And so the saber-rattling that's going on, I don't think can lead to anything at this point, because we have spent all our capability in Ukraine and in Iran already. Mm-hmm. What actual prospect is there of the West taking on China in the next 20 years? I don't know, Charles, do you see any prospect of the West taking on China in the next 20 years aside from nuclear?
No.
Well, it dovetails with the issue around European energy and NATO expansion also.
In what sense? Well,
it's yet again an attempt to maintain unipolar dominance.
Well, I mean, there's certainly you could. I mean, I would imagine it. I am not living in China, and I'm not a member of the Chinese Communist Party, despite the rumors you might see on the internet. The point is that the point is that everything that we're seeing at the moment has got no substance behind it. In terms of the saber rattling that's going on, it is more a psychological operation on these countries, and actually, as we see Trump's behavior with respect to Iran and his behavior on social media and whatnot. If I were, the leader of Russia or China, I would be sniggering behind the palm of my hand and saying these guys are no threat whatsoever. From the West point of view, they are trying to imply or suggest to these countries that they are still the dominant force, and that those countries should therefore do what they're told. I think that is increasingly an empty threat, and short of the use of nuclear weapons, I don't see that actually the United States, despite the immensity of its defense, in inverted commas, budget, is any serious threat to the other major powers in the world. Now, then there's the issue of nuclear, and I've said this before as well. We have no evidence that the West, that any Western nuclear weapons function. We don't know what state they're in. We don't know how well they've been maintained. We don't know if they've been maintained at all. We do know, for example, that Britain's nuclear deterrent is utterly useless, in the sense that the last two test firings of the Trident missile system, delivery system, failed. So, we're pushing one or two nuclear submarines around the world at any point in time with zero capability of delivering a weapon that we have zero knowledge of whether it actually functions or not. So, under those circumstances, is that any threat? I don't know the answer to that question, but I certainly have some major doubts. I'd be very interested to know what your thoughts are on that, Charles.
I don't want to seem sort of optimistic for the sake of it and without reason. I cannot foresee a nuclear war, a nuclear attack, and I think for a whole load of reasons, actually, not least because I think even those who might be tempted, or we think might be tempted to take that course of action, cannot have, for exactly the same reason, cannot have confidence in what effect would actually be delivered. I don't think they know what would happen as a result. And the element of the unforeseen consequence, surely, with the projected result would be reason enough to deter you from doing that. That, as I say, is perhaps might be perceived as an optimistic view. I mean, yes, I would like to remain optimistic about it, but I think it is also realistic. So I think it will remain there as a sort of, something that's always discussed, something that's always in the background. It can be a bargaining tool to a certain extent, but I can't see that in terms of conflict is actually going to come into it. So whether I'm right or wrong on that, I think what I would say though, with regard to the United States activity in relation to Taiwan, but not just Taiwan, in many other parts of the world, and China's position on that, I think we've talked about this a lot before. Chinese history, certainly the bits of it that we do think we know about over the last, say, 2,000 years, is suggestive very much of an approach that allows others to make or take actions that the Chinese can review and make a judgment on, as opposed to reacting to. And I would say that what is consistent about the failure of empire or big organizations or businesses or campaigns, especially military campaigns, is that they are undone by overextending. And I think that is, my view, is that is what China is looking at the United States as doing to itself. And this is, I cite him quite regularly, but I just do enjoy his analysis. Warwick Powell, who's one of Carl's regular guests on the Silk and Steel podcast, talks about exactly this. And America has become, I mean, probably has been for a long time, it's sort of become a caricature of itself. This big, bold, brash bully who makes all this noise and very seldom is actually called out and has to deliver on the promises of, whether it be, I mean, usually it is sort of lethal force. I'm not saying they have no military capability. Of course they do, but what I'm not really in a position to understand is how quickly that could be exhausted, or indeed how easily they might in fact end up overextending, overcommitting. And so engagements, either diplomatically or militarily, I mean, at the moment, just the obvious ones. Well, what are they trying to do? They're trying to exert influence in the high north, in the Arctic, with Greenland and sort of northwestern Russia in mind, and control of that region. They're also trying to exert control over Venezuela, over Iran, and in the South China Sea. Now, that is a lot of different things to be doing just straight away. There's like immediate things. There's a lot of different things to be doing at the same time when your economic circumstances are questionable, when your alliances with other countries are absolutely very questionable. And the other point Warwick Powell makes, which I think harks back to the multipolarity discussion that we sort of started with, is that countries move slowly. So I think on the one hand, we are seeing the decline of the United States as a unipolar force, but we don't see all of it yet, and it may only really be exposed by a mistake of greater proportions than any mistakes that we've seen to date. But also at the same time as that, running in parallel, are the changes in direction of other countries in response to this, because they have seen over a number of years, it's not just the last couple of insane years of Trumpism, but they've seen for a long time America looking like a less surefire bet, and therefore they will have, it won't be visible to us perhaps right now, but they will have been making provision for that, and the failure of sanctions is a really good example of that. Those individuals and countries, particularly countries that have been sanctioned, have still continued to be able to trade. Well, that wouldn't have been able to happen if unipolarity really was a credible thing, as it were. So I think there is a lot going on beneath the surface which we can't see, and that rather than there being a nuclear cataclysm, I think that the undoing will be more of an implosion, in that the United States in particular will simply become unstuck because they cannot match their rhetoric with their action, and you know, we see this all the way across the so-called developed world. We talked again, Mike spoke on Wednesday's news program, finished off the program with a very interesting poll that had been conducted with people who were, what age were they? Up to the age of 22? Up
to 29.
Up to 29.
It was
Sorry,
16
right.
to 29, yeah.
And their view, okay, I know we always have to take these things with a pinch of salt and whatnot, but the results of that were very, very interesting. And I would imagine that the results were conducted in the United States would be broadly similar, in that basically people are saying, yeah, I mean, my country is not looking out for me. I'm not being looked after. Why on earth would I go and put my kit on and go and fight in Iran or Venezuela or you know, whatever. So I think going back to the 2,000 years of history, China, as usual, are playing a long game, a sort of circumspect game, where in effect they just have to wait it out. They just sit there, just wait for America to fail all on its own. So that I might be sort of over optimistic, because let's face it, one has to check this with a bit of reality. In that, in fact, if America does fall apart, bearing in mind it is a significant trading partner for many, many, many countries in the world, it would be an absolute disaster if it did fail. So I don't want America to fail, but I certainly don't want it to be a big idiotic bully to the rest of the world. No, but
Charles, China and America are actually in on it together. It's all just theatre.
Well, yeah, there we go. I mean, it doesn't stack up. And again, I come back to the human nature thing of simply greed. I mean, you know, even in the White House, how many people are there sharpening their metaphorical daggers to plunge into Donald Trump's back? I mean, look at what's happened with
I don't think so. I think they think Donald Trump is the best thing since sliced bread, because somebody, and as more than one person, is making an absolute fortune at the moment on the so-called markets, trading on the basis of Donald Trump and his activities. He can be played, he can be sent in that direction, and that has one effect in the markets. We'll trade on that. Okay. He's sent in another direction. He is
all right. Loved. No, that's fair. That's fair. Okay, all right. All right. I'll take that, absolutely. But the point you've just brought out, which is the one I was actually trying to make, is about greed. I mean, how on earth are people seriously able to believe that they are all in it together and they're all on the same side and it's all joined up? Because they cannot be. People are so flipping greedy and selfish. I just don't see that as being at all realistic.
Okay, I'm going to end the conversation by pushing back, Mike. Sliced bread is not the best thing. It's a carbohydrate, and I get heartburn when I have bread. So
I completely agree with you, Jerm. I completely agree with you. Yeah.
I think that expression is a corruption. It's one of many, many corruptions, and the way we should look at it, which is exactly what happened to having your cake and eat it, which should really be said as eating your cake and having it, because that's the only way it makes sense. Sliced bread is the same. It's the machine that slices the bread. It's not the result. It's not the bread. Because actually, if you've, I don't know if have you ever watched a bread slicing machine?
Yes.
They are actually incredible to watch. There is a real, a proper sort of advancement in technology. It's very, very clever. So, but of course, it's just been changed over time, so that we think that it's that horrible sliced loaf of duck bread that's the answer. No, it's not. It's the clever machine.
Well, that is the note on which we will end this conversation.
That's really significant. From multipolarity to bread slicing. Yeah,
brilliant.
All right, Mike Charles, I'll catch up with you next week at a different time.
Indeed. And that's the title, by the way, from multipolarity to bread slicing. That's the title for this.
All right. Cheers, guys.
All right.
Bye.